All right, let's go ahead and kick it off. Thank you everyone for joining today's ESG Masterclass. It's time to do the Impastable, learn how to design an ESG policy framework. My name is Amanda Brief. I'm the US Marketing Director here at Clausematch, and I'm going to be kind of behind the scenes as your pseudo moderator for today. Now, before we get started, we just wanted to go through some quick housekeeping items. So note that all participants except the panelists are muted. However, we want to keep this, as an engaging conversation. So if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you so that you can speak into the live webinar. Alternatively, you can provide your questions and comments in the chat box as well. We'll be moderating them throughout the masterclass. And lastly, I wanted to note to please stick around for the end of the session. We have a guest speaker, Jessica Hunt, who will be leading a pasta making class. So I'll talk through the agenda for that shortly. Now, I just wanted to quickly kind of introduce Clausematch, the sponsor of today's ESG Masterclass. We're an award-winning regulatory technology company. We help organizations throughout the policy management lifecycle. We support organizations across small and mid-market organizations all the way to enterprises. And in terms of industries that we support, we ideally support any highly regulated industry, including financial services, fintech and payments, as well as insurance. And lastly, we are a global company, so we have offices across the US, the UK, and Singapore. So that's just a little bit about Clausematch. Now let's dive into today's speaker. So I'm glad to be joined by Jason Mefford. He is the CEO and co-founder of C-Risk Academy. They're one of the largest video on-demand webinar and certification learning platforms for internal auditors, risk, and compliance professionals. And I'll let Jason introduce himself shortly. But before we get started, just want to quickly go through the timing so everyone is aware. So the ESG Masterclass will run for approximately 90 minutes. So we'll end around 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And then right after that, we'll dive into the pasta making class, which will run for approximately 30 to 45 minutes. So if you do have the time, definitely stick around for that. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jason to kick off today's ESG Masterclass.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here. I hope everybody else is excited to be here as well. So what we're going to do to start off with, because this isn't your normal webinar, this is a masterclass, right? So again, what we're going to do is a little bit of a different format, right? So I'll be talking, obviously, you'll be listening, but in this format, there's much more of an opportunity for us to directly interact by using the chat. Like Amanda said, we can have you raise your hands. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. We can bring you off mute, and we can actually have a two-way dialogue. Because the idea, so first off, I want you to set in your mind, this is not a webinar, this is a master class, okay? And so another thing for you to do, grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, right? I'll go old school with me here. And because as we're going through this, there's going to be some different things that you're going to go, aha, right? You're going to have these different aha moments as we go through this that you're going to want to take notes on. You're also going to want to hang around until the end. Amanda already talked about the fun pasta making class that's coming up at the end of it as well. So, most of the time, most of the stuff that we learn is kind of boring and routine and blah, 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 blah. So they're trying to make it a little bit fun for you. So hang around until the end to get a little break from your normal job. And, I know many of you probably are foodies and like to cook. So it's going to be a great opportunity for you to be able to do that. Now, before we jump in, again, it's going to be interactive. So I'm going to be pausing at different points, reading some of the Q&A and chat and other things like that as well. We'll be talking more. And so first off, I just wanted to practice a little bit with the chat to make sure that everybody knows where the chat is and that it's working. So everybody now pull up, go to the chat. And so, everybody's probably familiar with Zoom, but you can get to it at the bottom menu. And I just want you to type in where you are located in the world. Okay, so again, we're just going to practice this, but as Amanda said, they're an international company, so I'm sure we have people from all over the world as well. So let's hit the chat box, everybody. So just type in where you are in the world.
Oh, it looks like the chat might be disabled.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I will try to get
Chat
that. Yep, I'll try to get
is
that squared
disabled.
away. In the meantime, you can put in your comments in the Q&A, and I'll make a note, Jason, once we get that kicked off.
Okay. So I guess chat's disabled for now. Here we go. So we've got somebody from Brazil. Let's see here. I got to pull this up. We got Brazil, we got Mexico, South Africa, Luxembourg, right? We got North Carolina, Ohio, Minnesota, South Africa,
Okay, it
London,
looks like
London.
it's working right now, Jason.
Okay, so
Just,
chat is enabled again.
yep.
All right, sweet. So we've got people from all over the world. I'm in Los Angeles myself, so I'm here in California. So maybe what we can do is now that we've got the chat enabled, we can switch back over to chat. Because it'll be easier. It's a little bit more condensed for me to be able to see on my side. So here we go. We got people coming in on the chat. There we go. All right, that is working good. Ooh, Kazakhstan. I know Kazakhstan. So we got people from all over the world, right? So this is great. Germany as well. All right. So now what I wanted to do is because as I said, right, this is a master class. It's not just a webinar, so I'm not just going to be talking at you. But what I wanted to do is, when you signed up for this, there were certain things in the page that you went to register that said what we were going to be working on today, right, and talking about. And so I've listed those 4 up there as A, B, C, and D. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at those answers, right? So we've got assess current ESG guidelines and requirements. B is how to align your ESG approach with your organization's strategic goals. C, organizing a core committee across the major functions. And D is about key metrics and insights. So what I want you to do now in the chat box is just so that I can kind of help understand, because we're going to tailor this. It's going to be customized. I like to do customized things. And so we want to make sure that we're spending the time today talking about what you most want to hear about. So in the chat box now, I just want you to type A, B, C, or D. Look at those 4 and tell me which of these you are most interested in. And I'm going to kind of try to keep track of where most of the votes are coming in for. All of them. Okay, so far it looks like D is the highest ranking one. So keep them coming in. So it's looking like to me that A and D so far are the highest rated ones. Oops, get back here. All right. Maybe you know which actor that actually comes from. It's Matthew McConaughey's. It's actually his first. If you're a Matthew McConaughey fan, those are the first words that he ever spoke in a movie. He had a small part in a movie called Dazed and Confused, and those were ad-libbed words. All right. That was the first words that he actually did on camera. So, okay. So we'll try to get through, like I said, we're going to try to get through and talk about a lot of these as well, but that helps to give me some idea as to where we should be focusing our efforts as well today as we're going through and talking about this. So again, as we're going through, you can type questions into the chat area. And you can also, raise your hand and we can actually come off and I can talk with you a bit about some of the stuff as well. Okay. Let me switch that view. So I think now I can see when people raise their hand. Okay, so let's just start jumping in, right? And I know if you were on the last webinar that I did with Clausematch, we had this slide in here. because again, we're not going to get into all the stuff behind it, because this is intended to be more, deeper level as well. Okay. And so, but just to keep in mind, because they're acronyms, and what is it actually that we're talking about? Because a lot of times people, the E, the S, and the G, right, is people don't fully understand, or for each organization, ESG is going to look a little bit different for you. And so if you've been around for a while, like I have, you're probably familiar with corporate social responsibility, which has been around for a long time. It's not just environmental, right? At that point, it's talking about, ethics, stuff around employees and wellness. But we've been having a lot of the discussion around environmental as well. And because the E comes in first, a lot of people kind of jump there and they kind of forget the social side of things as well, right? And so so we're going to be talking about kind of all of these different areas. And what I'm going to tell you to begin with, because I know most of you wanted to know about the key metrics and insights, right? And we're going to get there and talk about it. But I know what happens a lot of times is people are like, well, just tell me the metrics that I got to do. Just give me a list of the ones. I'll go and calculate all of these things, and then I'll know whether or not I'm doing it right. But I got to kind of pause you at this point and tell you that it depends, right? There's a joke usually with people that have done training with me. The answer to most questions that you ask are, it depends. And why does it depend? Well, because different parts of ESG are going to be more relevant to you than they might be to someone else. How you calculate these things, what you are choosing to track, is also probably going to be different, right, for you than it may be for somebody else. And part of that is you've got different objectives, you've got different strategies, you're looking at, you have different management reporting, all kinds of things like that, that you have to take into consideration for you to be able to know what's right for you. Okay. Now, as we're going through as well too, stay on until the end, because you're going to find out there's going to be some information we're going to let you know about at the end for those of you that are working on this, that want more information to be able to know. So hang around until the end and we'll tell you about that as well, right? Because we're going to talk about what we can today, but I know it's going to leave some of you with some other questions. But the intention and kind of the purpose for how we're doing this today as well is to start having you ask yourself some questions, right? Because asking these questions to yourself, to your team, to other people in your organization is going to help you get more clarity on the areas where you need to focus your attention. Okay. So let's get going. So the first thing, right? How to prepare for ESG. And again, I know even though a lot of you put in, hey, we want to know the metrics, you're going to have to prepare to be able to know what those metrics are that you're going to need to do as well. Okay. And so let's just jump in and start talking about some of the different questions that you would start asking yourself. So the first question, what requirements do you have to follow? So even just in the chat box right now, I know we've got people from all over the world, but what are some of the types of ESG requirements that you all have to follow now, or that you're already aware of? Just start typing some of those in the chat box. EU stuff, SEC, right? So for the people that are here in the US. MSA, Workers' Council. Yeah, well, and Rudy brings up, it's still largely voluntary in South Africa, right? Now, it's for most of you, what you're going to find is it is voluntary. Okay, most of the stuff is voluntary, because you can think about compliance in kind of two ways. There's mandatory requirements. Those are things where there's laws, there's regulations, there's things like that that you must do, right? And so when the SEC decides that they're going to, if they decide to go this route and make some of these changes that are requirements for publicly traded companies in the US, that then will become a mandatory compliance requirement. But what you see in most of the ESG space is it's voluntary. Your organization, your industry is choosing to comply with certain things, right? They're making promises to other people in the world to say, look, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint. Look, we're going to be more, inclusive and diverse in how we're doing business. We're going to be, a much more sustainable company. We're going to change our packaging. We're going to be carbon neutral, right? A lot of those things are actually voluntary things. And this is one of the questions that you have to ask yourself so you can start making a list of these different requirements. Are they mandatory or are they voluntary? Now, if they're mandatory, you're going to need to find a way to do something about it. But if they're voluntary, now your organization gets to choose, right? And this is where your objectives and your strategies start coming back into it, is to help you be able to determine, okay, well, if most of our competitors are following this, does that mean that we need to follow it too? And the answer might be yes, or the answer might be no. Like, hey, we don't care what everybody else is doing. We're not going to do that because we just choose not to do that. And it's okay. It's what again, as I said, what your organization is choosing to do. So another question, for you to start thinking about is, well, what have you already promised to follow? Now, where do you think you're going to find out what your organization has already promised that they're going to do? Where would you find some of that information? Again, so I can't see everybody that's raising your hand, but some of the places that you can look for that, right? So, yep, some of the marketing materials, right? So again, if your company is making promises in a marketing plan, if it's putting things in annual reports, or if you do have already some of these CSR reports or things like that, then you're already promising certain things, right? Government filings, speeches, things that your executives are saying, press releases, right? Because here's what happens, right? Is when an organization comes out and makes some comment like, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 10% over the next 5 years. Well, that is one of these promises that we're talking about in bullet point 2. So if you've made that promise to the world, right, now you've got to start thinking about, okay, if we've promised this, how are we making sure that that is actually what we're doing? We've got to have some management processes in place to make sure that we're doing that. We probably should be doing some sort of auditing of it to make sure that we're actually doing it as well, right? Third bullet, what are your competitors or industry doing, right? And so here's maybe a question too that some of you can put in the chat box. Do you feel like, are you getting pressure to do this because your competitors in your industry are doing this, right? Because, again, you might be being told to go do it, but why are you being told to do it? Are your competitors and others in your industry actually doing it and you feel like you have to do it in order to keep up with everybody else? So that'd just be kind of interesting if anybody wants to provide any feedback on that in the chat as well, if you're feeling pressure from that, or is this pressure that you're kind of putting on yourself, right? So, are other people in your organization asking you to do this? Or are you looking at it as, well, hey, I'm in charge of compliance or I'm in charge of whatever, and I think this is a good idea to do, and I want to be proactive. I want to get out ahead of it, but which one is it? Because I've got lots of experiences of leaders who wanted to do things. They wanted to make their function world class. They wanted to be best in class at something. And so they push their organization to do something that the organization doesn't really want to do. Now, what do you think happens when somebody is pushing and trying to drive change in your organization that nobody else wants? After a while, those people don't end up in the organization any longer, right? And so this is kind of where this fourth bullet comes in. Well, do you have to be the leader, or can you be a follower? And so let's just kind of talk about that, because again, I'm old enough now that I've lived through a lot of things like ESG, right? We had SOX, we had Y2K, we have different market turndowns, we had CSR stuff before. And your organization can choose to be a leader, somebody who wants to be in the forefront, that's out there kind of doing things before everybody else, or you can choose to be a follower, right? Which there's nothing wrong with being a follower. I mean, there's a lot of companies that have made a lot of money not by being the innovator and coming up with new products or new ideas, but by following quickly after other people do it. And there's a benefit sometimes for being a follower, right? Because you can end up saving yourself a lot of time and money by letting other people make the mistakes instead of you making the mistakes as well. And so I'm just interested, again, from the people on the call today, just type in either leader or follower. Do you feel like you need to be a leader in this, or would you prefer to be a follower and kind of wait and see what everybody else does first? Okay, interesting. Yeah, well, and it's interesting, Evgenia, I want to know, but then I want to follow, right? We need to understand, and then sometimes being a follower is easy. Okay, now we're getting more leader on there too, right? So we've got a mix of both kinds of people that are on here, right? And so, again, it's which one are you going to be? Which one is your organization going to be? And you're probably going to start to get some information from the board, from executives, on what their expectation is as well. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there tends to be a knee-jerk reaction that, oh my gosh, I've got to be the leader. Well, it's okay to be a follower. There's nothing wrong with being the follower as well. Like I said, a lot of times I prefer to do that. So I let other people make mistakes. I let other people spend all the money, and then I can decide, what works, what doesn't work based on what other people have been doing as well. Okay, another thing for you to consider here, are the environmental or social aspects more important? Now, again, I think, Rika has said we're in healthcare, so it's critical for them for the S, right? More the social side of it. Now, again, this is going to probably depend on the type of organization that you are, right? We know that a lot of the social aspects are becoming more and more important. More and more people are talking about things like diversity and inclusion and things like that. But, what type of business are you? If you're a natural resource business, then maybe environmental is still going to be very important to you because you've got the lens on you, right? I mean, American football is just starting again, so I usually don't watch regular TV, so I don't get to watch like commercials normally, because I just watch movies or series without commercials. But I was noticing too, I think it was Chevron, obviously natural resource oil and gas company. And their advertisements were, again, talking about and trying to impress upon all of us that were watching that, look, Chevron is out there trying to find alternative solutions to our energy needs, right? And so again, for them, that's probably going to be a bigger kind of thing, right? And environmental can be a lot of different things as well. I can't remember if I talked about packaging on this last one, but I think, at least to me personally, packaging is a huge environmental issue that a lot of times we don't think about, right? We think about carbon emissions and stuff like that, but it always gets me when I get something delivered to me in the mail and it's this big box and I open it up and it's like packaged in 5 different things, and it's a little thing that's about the size of my hand, but it comes in a big box, right? And more people are going to be thinking about or seeing some of those things as well, right? Now, the last two that are on here, right, are some actions more important than others? So again, you're not going to be able to do everything under the ESG umbrella. You're not going to be able to do all of them well. You're probably not even going to be able to do all of them at all, right? Because you don't have unlimited resources to be able to do everything. And so this is where you start having this prioritization kind of discussion as you're going through this on, okay, what really is most important for us? Now, sometimes this might be, again, where are you feeling the heat, right? So there's a great movie, old De Niro and Pacino movie called Heat, right? And the idea is when you feel the heat, you got to be able to get out or be able to move, right? And so, for companies like oil and gas companies, they're feeling the heat from environmental groups, right? So for them, that may be a more important area for them to focus. But even within that sub niche, there's going to be certain elements of that are more important for them, right? So think about where you're going to get the bang for your buck. Where can I invest, and kind of think about it from a Pareto principle? What are the 20% of activities that are going to give me the 80% benefit? And I want to focus there first, right? Yeah. And so things like a materiality matrix, different tools for you to kind of be able to determine, because honestly, there's a payback, right? And so you've got to be thinking about a return on investment, because your company is not going to give you unlimited resources and unlimited money to go and fix all of these things. And so they're going to want to see some sort of a return on investment. Now, that might be in, perception. It might be public relations. It might be increased sales, right? There's different things. And for each of you, you're going to have to figure out what those things are. But find out what some of the most important things are first, and then start tackling them one at a time. Okay, because that's going to be important. If you try to shotgun approach, right, versus rifling. And again, I grew up shooting guns because that's what my family did. And you can, a shotgun shoots out a lot of different little BBs, right? Because you're usually using it for bird hunting or things like that, right? Where you're shooting out a lot of little tiny pellets, hoping to attract or get something along the way, versus rifling, where you're actually aiming, pointing, and just pulling the trigger once, and there's only one thing that comes out. And so think about this as well. Usually a shotgun approach of trying to do lots of things in a little way is not nearly as effective, or it's not as efficient either, as rifling in on one particular or a couple of particular areas that are most important to your organization, where you feel like you're going to be getting the most value from it. Okay. Now, the last one, is it a compliance exercise or is it a strategic initiative? This is another one of those that kind of goes back to some of these first bullets that we talked about. Some of your organizations only want to do this because they have to do it, and they want to check some boxes, right? They want to be able to, when people ask them the question, do you have your ESG under control? Yep, we do. Well, how do you do that? Well, we've got this committee set up, and we've done this, and we've done this, and we've done this. We're good, right? And that's all that they want to do. Other companies are going to see this as a strategic initiative, right? They're going to look at it and say, look, this is one of the ways that we are going to prove that we're different than everybody else. Look at what we do for our employees. We pay our employees better than, anybody else in the industry. We allow them to have 4-day work weeks. We allow them to, work from wherever they want to in the world. We provide better benefits. We invest more back into the communities, right? 10% of our income goes back into providing social programs in the communities where we operate. So, again, but each person, each organization is going to be different on how you're actually thinking about that. Okay. So I just want to kind of pause here at this point and see questions, from this. Again, each of you is going to come up with some different answers to this, but this is going to start, helping you go from this big funnel down to where you should be focusing your attention more. And this, again, leads into everything else that we're doing as well. So any questions about that so far? Dig into that any deeper? Anybody want to come off mute and talk for a minute about that? This is again where the chat and raise your hand comes in, because I can't see you. Okay, Paul, any tips on priorities where best to start? Part of this, again, is going to be asking these questions, right? And finding out, we'll talk about in a couple of the other sections here about maybe some of the other people in your organization that are already doing some stuff. But, really you have to look at it and think, what is most important? Where can we get the biggest, I just say bang for the buck, right? If we spend $1 million, where can we get the most benefit? Because typically that is the best place to start. Now, there's different ways, you can think about like how we do risk assessments and ranking of different risks, and, using things like materiality matrices and other stuff like that. You can use some of those tools to help you in determining some of that. But a lot of times, to me, it's like, well, what does my board and my executives, what are they most concerned about as well? That should be a big driver into it, because again, most of the time they're going to be guiding or directing you in where it is. Now, what I will say is sometimes they just read an article and they're like, hey, Paul, you're in charge of this. Go take care of our ESG, just go do it. Right. And at that point, without much direction, it's going to be pretty hard for you to know where to start. So you've got to start asking yourself some of these questions, and you need to actually turn back around and ask those executives some of these same kinds of questions. Right. Look, Jason, CEO, is your concern that we're just going to be able to check the boxes? So if anybody asks you if we're doing it, you can say yes with a straight face? Or is this something that you see as really strategic to our organization, and that we maybe need to be doing more than the bare minimum as well? Okay. Other questions about that? Does that answer your question, Paul? Yeah, most bang for the buck is the one that I like, because what I will tell you is you will never have enough time, you will never have enough money to do everything you would like to do. So treat this just like you would any other ROI kind of exercise. And so again, for each of you in your organizations, you've got some ways that you're coming up with for capital projects or other things like that, in a way that your organization kind of assesses where to invest. Use those processes, right? Your company's already used to doing that, and just kind of show them or walk through a similar process to what they're used to seeing of, hey, if we spend $1 million over here, I think this is the benefit that we're going to get. And look, it's $20 million. So $1 million investment gives us a $20 million benefit. That's a pretty good ROI, especially if it's within a year or two, right? Okay, let me just check here on the Q&A as well to see if anybody put anything in there. Okay, we should be good there. And again, as we're going through this, feel free to raise your hand as we're going through, because I can't see if you have a confused look on your face. I'm just trusting that unless you're putting something in the chat, that we're all okay. Okay, now I wanted to talk just a little bit about governance here as well, because I think this is going to help you in kind of putting this all together. Because there's another acronym out there called GRC, right? Governance, risk, and compliance. And a lot of times when the G gets put in it, we kind of forget what the G really is, okay? Or we think that the G is something that is standalone by itself. And so I wanted to take just a minute to go through and talk about this with you, because governance is really how you're putting this all together as well. Okay, so one of the best definitions for what governance actually is, I think, is from OSEG, which is, kind of the granddaddy of the GRC. It's one that I helped them write their capability model and do their certifications and other stuff. So I've been involved with them for probably 15 plus years. But I really like this definition. I think is the best for me from a governance perspective. So what governance actually is the act of externally directing, controlling, and evaluating an entity, process, or resource. So you notice that there's some different words that are in there on purpose. The first one is it's externally directing, controlling, or evaluating. Okay. So when we think about at the top level of an organization, there is a governance group called the board of directors. The board of directors, in theory, in most of the places in the world, is made up of what are called independent directors. These are people who are not a part of management, but they are external from the organization. Okay, so it's an external view of the organization by people who are not necessarily clouded by being the ones who are doing the management of the function. Okay, they're directing, so they're providing direction. They're putting controls in place, and they're evaluating how well management is actually working. Now, governance can be done at the entity level, at a process level, or at a resource level. So again, I want you to think about that. Entity would be top level. That's people like board of directors. It could be over a process within the organization. You're putting governance around that process or around a particular resource as well. So another example, right? I gave you the example of the board of directors. Another example of a governance group within most organizations is an IT steering committee. So an IT steering committee is usually a group of people who are the customers of your IT group, okay? And the IT steering committee provides external guidance or direction to IT on where they would like IT to spend their money, serving them as the customers. Okay. And so because, again, it's external to IT, you can think of the IT steering committee as being the governance group, the IT group being the management function. Okay. And I'm going to show you a picture here to kind of put this all in context as well. But here's some of the typical activities, right? Those governance groups are helping to set strategy. They're setting risk guidelines. So things like risk tolerances and other things like that are usually set by these governance groups. They're establishing different roles and responsibilities. They're kind of, laying the landscape of who's in the organization, who's responsible for what. A lot of times they're involved in policy, or you'll see where policy is a way of kind of documenting some of these governance expectations, and it's a way of putting that into a process within the organization. Now, the board or the governing group is doing some sort of oversight, right? They'll give direction to somebody, and then that somebody will come back and report to them. They'll be overseeing and making sure that things are happening the way that they're expecting them to do so. How do they do that? A lot of times is through some of these metrics. So what you end up doing is you give somebody a job to do, and you come up with metrics to make sure on whether or not they're doing that, right? So think about things like classic project management. Well, you're going to include certain indicators or metrics to make sure that the project stays on track, right? You might even come up with stoplight, sort of things, red, yellow, green, as to how you're progressing and whether or not the metrics are kind of moving along the way that you need them to. But also, along with governance, there's things around disclosure and transparency. So if you look at things like the OECD guidelines on governance, they're talking mainly about it from a board standpoint, but the disclosure and transparency of what's actually going on is also important in this process as well. Okay, so those are some of the basics about it. Now, if I kind of show you a picture of it, you can think about it this way, and I think this puts things in context for you better, right? Is that we're trying to put governance around these ESG things, but you've got different groups within the organization. You've got a governance group that's externally directing. You've got a management group that's internally directing. They're the ones doing the work. And then you've typically got an assurance function. Now, that could be an external auditor. It could be a regulator. It could be a third or a second line function who's providing assurance. And what the assurance role does is it audits what management is doing and it reports back to the governing group. Okay. Now, you see that there's circles for performance, risk, and compliance. This is how we would typically talk about it from a GRC perspective, right? There's certain performance or operational things that you're doing that you're going to put governance around. People are going to be managing that function. People are going to be auditing those operational performance things. Same thing. There's going to be governance around risk. Somebody's going to be managing the day-to-day risk. Somebody is going to be providing assurance that the management is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Compliance, same way. So you can think about this in the same way from an ESG perspective, which, again, ESG would fall under, depending on how you're defining some of these things, under the risk or compliance bucket. But this is what we're talking about when the G gets added to ESG. Okay. So again, we'll want to pause there. Questions about that as far as what the G part of the ESG means and what governance actually means as well. So hopefully everybody hasn't fallen asleep or been multitasking. Can I get somebody to just hit the chat to make sure that y'all are still here? All right, well, I'm going to trust then that oh, crystal clear, still here. Okay, good. Any questions about that? So again, I trust that I explained that clearly, because like I said, I know a lot of times people kind of confuse that. So again, as you're starting, right, you need to be thinking about how are we going to put governance, management, and assurance around these different ESG initiatives that are important, right? So again, I'll just take a couple of examples here, right? Well, Andreas asked too, would you think ESG is part of performance, risk, compliance, or additional new? I would actually, it would depend on how you are defining this. And so the way I define it may not be the same way that you would define it. I see ESG topics as falling under compliance, being mandatory and voluntary ways of complying with promises that you've made to other people. But again, we don't want to strain at gnats on, it has to fit in this bucket. The whole idea is you just need to make sure that there's governance, there's management, and there's assurance around all of the different ESG initiatives that you're going to be doing. So as an example, I'll just try to come up with some quick examples here. Let's say that, again, your board says, look, we want to reduce carbon emissions. Okay, great. We need a little bit more information than that, right? We need more direction. If you're the person managing it and the board just comes to you and says, yeah, go reduce our carbon emissions. Okay, well, you're going to have to ask some more questions, right? Well, what does that mean? Which way are we calculating carbon footprint? Because I still think there's several different ways of actually calculating that, right? So which method of calculating carbon footprint are we going to be using? How much of a reduction and by when do we want that done? Right. So management needs some of this information. They need that guidance from the governance group. Okay, well, we're going to use this method, but we want this percentage for the whole company. So we don't necessarily have to do that in all regions of the world, because we know maybe some regions it's going to be harder to do than others. And so we're going to say, hey, in China, we want this rate. In the EU, we want this rate. In North America, we want this rate. And we want it to average out for the whole company to be 10%. And we want that 10% reduction to happen in the next 5 years. Okay, now, as you put the governance in place around that, you've given more of the direction. Now you can go to work with coming up with policies and changing your processes and all of the management activities that are going to end up being done so that you can comply with what you're being asked to do. Somebody's going to have to audit it to make sure that, again, the numbers that we're reporting back either publicly or the numbers that we're reporting back to the governance group are accurate and we're actually on track for doing what we need to be doing. And so as part of this process, you're going to come up with, that's where the roles and responsibilities are going to come in, is who's going to do what and how are we going to make sure that we're actually doing it. Okay. So that's the main idea behind what I'm trying to share with you here, because the problem is if you don't have enough guidance, you don't know what to do. And so, you have to have enough guidance from a governance standpoint that management can actually go and do it, but then you got to make sure and check it. And the assurance part down here at the bottom, I think, is one of those that a lot of times people are kind of overlooking. They're just going out and trying to do it. The problem is, especially as you start reporting, people are going to hold you accountable to these numbers. And so if you haven't made sure that what you're reporting is accurate, you can have a bigger public relations nightmare and reputation risk on your hands than if you had never done anything to begin with. Okay. Any other questions about that before we move on? All right. I know it seems like there's a little delay in the chat too, so I'll keep watching that as well. So how do you put the governance? Well, again, do you already have established governance structure in your organization? And you might, right? Because again, like we said, ESG is just the latest flavor of a lot of the things that are already in place. Do you already have, are you already doing GRC? If you do, then you might have governance structures there that you can just use to accomplish your ESG efforts as well. Or is this something that's brand new, right? Maybe you haven't been doing CSR, you haven't been doing GRC, you haven't been doing some of these other things. And so you do need to actually start establishing some sort of governance around these sort of initiatives, or at least governance that is more inclusive and is going to start to pull some of the other people together that we're going to be talking about here soon. So some other questions, right? Well, if you don't have that established governance structure, then maybe what committees, policies, roles, metrics, reporting are you going to need in place to support your ESG efforts? And again, I can't give you a laundry list of exactly what they're going to be, but answering some of those previous questions that we've talked through is going to help you start to come up with what's right for you to be able to support putting governance, putting management, and putting some sort of assurance around whichever one or two or three of these efforts that you find is most important that you want to start working on first. Okay. All right. So who should be a part of your efforts? Because this is a question that, again, like I said, I've been working with organizations doing the GRC kind of side, which is very similar to what we're seeing now. It's the same process. And this is one of the questions that people ask all the time is who should be a part of the effort. So I just wanted to go through and talk about this with you then as well. So if you think about it, I like to say, people talk about wanting to get a seat at the table. That's a term that's out there a lot. And who could be at the table? Well, there could be lots of people at the table, but who should be at the table, right? And again, if you already have established governance processes in your organization, you probably already have some committees or groups of people, and you've already established RACI schedules and other stuff like that for similar types of things that you've been working on. So a lot of this might already be in place. You may just need to ask questions on, well, hey, maybe does somebody else need to be invited to the party that wasn't here before? So let's go through and we'll just kind of talk about what some of these functions are. So obviously, whoever your governance group is going to need to be at the table. Now, at the highest level in the organization, that's going to be your board of directors. It could be groups like your executive leadership team, right? They meet regularly. You could think of them as a committee. Are there other governance groups? Do you have a compliance governance group or ethics and compliance group that would be providing governance? Should your strategy people be involved? Right now, again, if the answer to the question that we had before was nope, we're just doing this to check the boxes, then maybe strategy isn't as important, right? But if this is something that you're using as a competitive advantage, then you're going to want to have your strategy group involved. Same with, we've got sales and marketing up there as well. A lot of times people leave out marketing and strategy, and what you'll end up finding is what marketing is saying to the street to try to sell products is not what you're actually doing, right? Or doesn't line up with some of the other things that you're doing internally. And so you want to make sure that all of these things are actually aligning as well. Okay. Question from Faisal, right? Shouldn't environmental experts or specialists be mandatory at the table? Because it's a highly technical subject. Again, it's going to depend on the type of organization that you're running, right? If you're in, natural resources, if you're in industrial, if you're in, consumer packaged goods, then probably having that environmental group actually at the table is going to be important, right? But let's say I'm a software company, or I'm a financial services firm. I probably don't have much from an environmental perspective that I have to deal with because I don't really have many environmental risks, right? Like for my company, we don't have any of that, right? I mean, our team works from home, remotely all over the world. We have, other than our personal life, we don't impact the environment with what we do because everything is virtual, online, digital, right? So for some of those companies, environmental, you probably wouldn't even have an environmental group. But what I will tell you is if you have an environmental department or a head of environmental for your organization, then that's probably a person who should be included on here as well, right? And I left that one off necessarily from the list, but it would be somebody to consider. You may also have, again, risk management people. Because again, some of these ESG topics or efforts can carry over into some of the risks that may be are already being managed by some of the risk people in your organization. Internal audit, or some of these other second line functions who are performing assurance in your organization, those are probably going to be the people doing that assurance role that we had at the bottom, right? So obviously you would want them included. Compliance, ethics, and culture, and again, a lot of these are kind of what we would typically say from a GRC perspective, but that is also relevant for ESG. IT, because again, sometimes they get left out, but ultimately, as you're looking at things like metrics and processes and reporting, IT is going to be very important, a very important partner for you to be able to work with to get a lot of the information that you're going to need to get. Now, sometimes finance might be important, for ESG, human resources is going to be an important role, right? Because all of the things that relate to the employees, you're going to want or need HR support as well. Legal, again, that's going to depend somewhat on the type of an organization that you are. But if you have a huge legal department in your organization already, they're probably going to need to be involved. If you just have one person that's a general counsel, they may need to be involved as well, just from the legal perspective. But, again, it's going to depend on what their role in the organization is. So what I'm meaning is, if you have one person that's a general counsel, but you have 20 people on your compliance team that are technical experts, then that legal person may not need to be there. Maybe they do, right? Those are questions you're going to ask. Another one that is often overlooked are what I just call business unit managers, or the operations people. That management team that's actually out there, that's actually doing the work. A lot of times they don't get invited to the table. And so what ends up happening is whatever governance group or second line function says, we got to do this stuff, and you just got to find a way to make it happen. A lot of times they can't do it the way that we were, that we want them to, right? Because there's some operational limitations or other things that they don't get asked about. Things just get pushed down on them, and they end up becoming burdensome for your organization. So you're going to want to include the right kind of people, because they are what makes up most of that management function that's actually doing the day-to-day stuff. Your board, sales and marketing, we talked a little bit about. Public relations, so again, if you are a publicly visible company and you have a big public relations group, maybe you're publicly traded, you're highly regulated, you are, in the news, or a highly visible company or brand, then a lot of times maybe your public relations people are going to be important to have as part of what you're doing. Now, as well, procurement, third party. I know there's a lot of third party risk management and vendor risk management things that have been going on already, and may already be going on in most of your organizations. There's another kind of effort that has already been going on that probably has some governance, management, and assurance around it already. But it's important to think about them in this bigger picture as well, because a lot of times when companies get themselves in trouble, it's not even what the company did or didn't do. It's what one of their third parties that they're working with did or didn't do, but the bigger company gets blamed. And so there's always the kind of joke. It's not really a joke because it's not that funny, but it's whoever has the deep pockets is the one that people are going to go after. And so I remember, I worked a lot in the food industry, and a lot of times, like McDonald's was one of our customers. And a lot of times when you would hear things about McDonald's in the news, it wasn't anything that McDonald's did. Sometimes it was, the company they work for, or it was even a third level down right? That this little tiny, chicken farm in Arkansas did something, but the chicken from that, chicken farm ended up in some McDonald's restaurants. So the news blows it out of proportion and says, oh, it's McDonald's problem, right? Well, it is and it isn't. And so that's why, again, a lot of the third party things are important, especially in this, because it's more about the optics sometimes than it is about what you're actually doing or not doing. So again, these are some of the people that could be at the table. Ultimately, right, you have to start asking some of these questions and just figuring out what is right for your organization, who should be there. Now, what I will tell you is, again, some of the basic things around, teams and size of committees and other things would apply here as well. 3 people is probably a minimum. 5 people is better than 3, but you also don't want 30 or 40 people as well, because once you get too many people, it's really difficult to get anything done from that standpoint. But, again, like I said, typically, if you've already got some of these governance structures in place, you probably already have committees or other working groups that a lot of these people are on already, who are already dealing with some of the other efforts. So you might not need to recreate the wheel. If you don't have those things in place, then again, this is kind of how you could come up with some of this. Okay, so let me pause that point for any questions or comments about who could be at the table. All right, I'm just explaining everything wonderfully. All clear. Thank you for the confirmation. My audio is still working and you all can still hear me. And I'm not just talking to myself. Okay, so let's start talking about, we talked about some of these different things. Now, what's kind of your best approach? And we can kind of open it up here in just a minute for any questions towards the end. But the one thing is you want to get the right people in the room. Now, the whole GRC thing that we've been talking about for 20 or 25 years, the idea is within your organizations, there's lots of silos, lots of different people who is, doing their own little thing, right? You get told to go do something, you go and you do it, and your people are doing it, and you're just forgetting sometimes that there's other people in the organization that are doing things as well. And sometimes we don't have the right people in the room. And so it creates what are called silos in organizations, right? And so with ESG as well, you want to get the right people in the room, figure out who the right people are to have in the room and start having some of these discussions. Because what ends up happening if you continue to operate in the silos, sometimes well-intentioned groups in the organization will increase the risk for the rest of the organization because they're doing what's right for them, but it's to the detriment of the whole organization. So that's why getting people in the room, having the discussions is important. Now, in any of these kind of situations, whenever you're having meetings like this and you're meeting, across in kind of these matrixed committees or working groups, you've got to remember that when people come in, you've got to do what I call take your hat off, right? And I like to wear hats. And so I would tell everybody, again, when we came into the room, okay, here is what we're, going to be talking about today. Everybody take off your everyday hat, which means, okay, if I'm the head of HR, right, I need to not just think about what's in HR's best interest. If I'm in finance, I need to not just think about what's in the best interest of finance or IT or legal or whatever, right? We take off our everyday hat and we think about what is the best decision for the organization in totality, right? It might not be the decisions that we make in that room might not be the best for my group, but I know that they're the best for the organization as well, right? Now I want to go ahead and hit a couple of these other things before we go on here too, because I know I guess Bruce had asked, do you normally see a champion from the top of the organization? So back to kind of talking about the people. Yes, typically we do. And so what you would see is there's typically one person who would be kind of um, maybe not necessarily the champion, because I use that word kind of differently, but there's usually one person that's given the accountability and responsibility for a lot of these things. Typically, that would be the person who's kind of the committee chairperson, right? But you're going to have, I usually use the word champions as others in the organization who get it and who champion your cause. And so a lot of times those champions are going to be the people that maybe are in that room at the table, but they're also going to be people throughout the organization that are just championing the cause, right? They're helping you actually reduce some of the roadblocks and barriers that you have in the rest of the organization as well. Sometimes people will kind of, rise up to that level of participation just because they're a champion and they believe it as well. But, that's kind of where that goes. Now, no, Veronica had raised her hand. So if we can, Veronica, if you can come off mute, we can actually, brave soul, we can actually talk two-way and talking permitted. There we go. Veronica.
Sorry, apologies. It was a mistake.
Oh, okay. Well, we got to hear Veronica's voice and now we know it works. So, all right, everybody, we know it works. We can do this so we can actually talk as well as we're going on through this. So, okay. Oh, I got you. Because Veronica says it's a situation we're currently at in the present with their ESG plan. Okay. So another good approach. So again, getting the right people in the room, getting them to all realize that, look, we're here to do what's right for the organization. Everybody kind of take off your everyday hat. But usually a good tool to use is a RACI schedule, which stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So typically you can use this as kind of a governance tool to really help you know, okay, who's ultimately responsible and accountable for this particular thing or this process or whatever it is, right? They're the ones that at the end of the day have to make the decision. They're the one that's held accountable for the results of it, right? Because again, if you've got, one of the sayings I heard, too many chiefs and not enough Indians, right? If you've got too many people that are supposedly you got to have one decision maker at the end of the day who's held responsible for it, because if you don't, you get a bunch of finger pointing, right? At the end of the day. So who is that person? Typically that will be an executive level person who's responsible for it. Now they may or may not be the committee person, but they're the one who, if this thing doesn't work, the CEO or the board is going to hold accountable. And so typically, again, if this is coming from your board, if it's coming from your executive leadership team, right, it means that somebody's got to be held accountable for it. And so who is that person, right? Consulted means, before any decision is actually made, I need to consult that other person. Now, the difference between consulting and informing is I'm going to ask for their input. And so that's why there's certain functions like often HR, legal, where you will go to them and say, okay, here's the deal, right? I got this situation. I got to make a decision. And your lawyers will consult you and say, well, we've got this to deal with. We've got this litigation risk to think about. There's this law over here that we might do. In the past, we kind of did these other things, right? And so you can see some of that stuff, and they will provide you consultation. I would suggest, or, kind of provide you with some input on it. Now, at the end of the day, the person making the decision can go against what the lawyer was suggesting, right? That's their ability to do that. But they need to consult and get feedback from certain people. And so again, you can decide who those people are. Versus informed is, hey, a decision was made. you need to be aware of it. So we're letting you know that this was done. We didn't need your feedback from it, but you need to know that this was actually done, because it does affect you or impact you, right? Now, as part of this whole thing, and you can think about governance, as well in general, and governance is very close to the word government, right? And so if we think about, like, governments around the world are organized a little bit differently, but at least here in the US, we have a thing called checks and balances, right? We have a legislative, an administrative, and a judicial branch of government that are intended to hold each other in check and balance, right? Each one of those functions has a certain responsibility and is accountable for doing certain things. And the other branches hold them in check and balance, so that one person or one group, in theory, just can't go out and do whatever they want to do, right? And so within organizations as well, you want the same thing. You want healthy tension with checks and balances. And you might be saying, now hold it, why do we want tension? Well, healthy tension means, you and I might be talking, we might have totally different opinions about something, but we can have a healthy discussion and tension between our views or our opinions, right? And a lot of times that is done on purpose, right? There are certain people in your organization, like your legal counsel and your head of internal audit, will never always see exactly eye to eye, because they shouldn't, right? It's just the difference in the way that those people are programmed. Just like your head of sales is not going to agree with, certain other people in the organization as well. But having that healthy tension, having the debate, bringing up this different information, helps give you a better answer at the end of the day, because you're hearing the different perspectives and you've got people that are holding each other in check and balance as well. Okay. Okay, Brian, you've referenced doing what is right for the organization several times, and that may mean different things for different companies. Where does purpose come in this approach? So what do you mean by purpose exactly on that? So Brian, if you can give me a little more feedback on what you're meaning behind the purpose. Company purpose. Okay. So this is where, again, it kind of goes back to your objective and strategy and the purpose for which the company is created, right? And again, a lot of times we sort of forget that organizations are created for a purpose. Now, typically when somebody starts a business, they're very clear on what their purpose is. But over time, as the company grows, as people buy and sell that company, as different employees come and go, a lot of times that purpose is kind of lost or forgotten. But it's important to realize and to have the company purpose in mind when you're having these discussions. Okay, because let's say I'm a mass retailer, and my purpose is to provide cheap. I don't want to say cheap. I'll say inexpensive. My main purpose is to provide inexpensive goods and services for lower income people. Okay. If that's my purpose, right? Because I want to be able to have products or services that lower income people can afford. Because of that, it means I'm going to have to make some decisions about how to make sure that I'm providing low cost things to people, right? So cost is going to be a huge thing for me. And so as a result of that, I may not be at liberty to do some of the nice things that I would necessarily want to do, right? I might choose to use a sweatshop to make t-shirts because the only way I can sell a $4 t-shirt is to use a sweatshop. Now, I don't agree with sweatshops personally. I don't think most people do, but the company purpose may drive them to make those kinds of decisions, right? Versus, now we're getting, for example, a lot more socially conscious companies as well, right? Which is companies that are their purpose is, and they realize that, businesses that make money can do a lot more good by donating that money than because it's much easier to drive cash and income by running a business than it is trying to ask people for donations. And so what some companies are doing now is their main purpose is some social justice, social or sort of an initiative, right? That look, we sell widgets, but we are passionate about clean water. And so we sell widgets to people to help improve their life, but 20% of our profits go to clean water in the world, right? Well, that purpose would have to be included in there in knowing what's important for you from an ESG perspective as well. Okay, so if that didn't quite answer it, just let me know, Brian, in the chat. Karina, you asked about ELT. That was ELT usually stands for Executive Leadership Team. So typically it will be the top executives in your organization. It kind of acts like a committee, if you will, of typically people who report to the chief executive officer and maybe sometimes some other people. So, often you'd see, the CEO, their direct reports, and then they might have other people, like maybe the lawyer is there, if maybe the lawyer reports to somebody else, but you have somebody from legal that would be on that team as well. So that's what it means. And that last bullet point really is to kind of go with the point of, look, there's going to be committees that are already established in your organization where you may be able to leverage what you're doing off of the rest of the things as well. Okay. Okay, Veronica, about corporate culture. So it looks like it's an ideal scenario. Wouldn't corporate culture be a key enabler or hurdler? Yes, exactly right. And again, that's going to go back to some of those questions that we asked to begin with, right? Is what does your organization really want? What is that culture behind it? And if I'm a mass retailer who just wants to sell inexpensive stuff and make a whole bunch of money, or and not really care about some of the other stuff, or know that, because this is where culture comes up a lot of times too. And I don't know if anybody has watched the show Succession on HBO. I'm just starting to watch that show right now, and there's some different compliance things that kind of come up. It's about a family corporation, and the culture in most of your organizations is publicly they will say certain things, privately they will do something else. And so, what we're talking about here is ideal, and it's what we should be doing, but you do have to take the company culture into account in how you are going to do this. So this goes all the way back to some of the questions that we were asking towards the beginning, where, as an example, if you're getting direction from an executive and you need some clarifying questions, one of those questions might be, why are we doing this? Is this for a compliance purpose, or is it because we're using this as a strategic initiative? Oh, it's strategic. It's strategic. Oh, really? Is it really strategic? Explain to me how you think this is strategic, right? And again, if their only strategy behind doing some of these things is to make more money, then they don't really believe it from a strategy or from a social consciousness perspective. They're just using it as a way to make more money. That's more the compliance side of it, right? And if that's the case, then they're going to want to do as little as possible to make as much money as possible. And that's going to be the reality for some of the organizations that you guys work in. And that's okay, because that's what it is, right? There's other companies that are going to be a lot more socially conscious. They're going to care. They're going to be willing to give up some profit to do what they think is the right choice, right? And each of you and each of your cultures in your organization are going to be different that way. Okay, trying to keep track on time here. So let's see here. All right. Well, hey, look at that. We're to the question time anyway, right? So, so that was kind of the presented stuff that I really had for today, and so we did want to leave some time too, as well, for questions as well. So, any other questions from what we've been going through? Clear as mud. Okay, so hopefully this helps. Now, again, the question, that if somebody's asking about the presentation, I think, Amanda, you had said that that'd be sent out too. I think. So let's like I said, with the last few minutes, we can do any other questions that we want to go through as well. But, to kind of answer the question too about the metrics, again, I wish I could give you a list of 20 metrics that if you just did these and everything would be fine. But the problem is you've got to really answer some of these other questions to be able to know what the right metrics are, to make sure that these initiatives are on track, that you're actually able to, with a straight face, be able to tell people that you're actually doing what you're saying that you're doing. Okay. So let me just kind of run through what I had just kind of as a conclusion for kind of these last steps, for us to think about is, what do you need to follow? That's one of the things that we talked about to begin with. What are some of these things that you've either promised that you were going to do or that you're being required to do because of where you are in the world? What's most important requirement? So again, finding some way, you're gonna sit down and you're gonna come up with probably 100 different things you should do, but how can you narrow that down to something that you can actually work on, and that you can focus your most important time and money on some of those things where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. What silos do you already have in your organization? Now, I put the internal audit up there because I spent a lot of my career heading up internal audit for organizations and risk management and ethics and compliance. And I've recently found out that there are literally other groups within some multinational companies that actually have internal audit in their title, but don't report to the chief internal auditor. And so, again, who do you already have that's doing some of this stuff in your organization? Because you're starting some efforts, but have other people been starting other efforts as well? So, what governance do you need? Do you already have some of these things in place? Who should be at your table? But at the end of the day, really, what's practical for your organization is the thing that's most important. You're not going to be able to do everything, and just do what works best for your organization as well. Okay. I think we had. So here's a surprise, everybody, as well too, right? And I'm gonna go back and look here at the chat as well. But thanks for attending. And here's the thing that I told you at the beginning, that a lot of you might walk away with, man, that was great, but I still got questions. So you can contact me directly and contact Clausematch. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do as well is, for those of you that found that today was really valuable, send Clausematch a note. Right? They spend a lot of time and money putting these things together for you. If you appreciated this and this masterclass format as well, send them a message and let them know you liked it, right? Because if you want them to do more of it, they need to know you liked it, right? I just went to a dinner with one of my financial advisors, And it was the same thing, right? So when we got back, I sent him a message because he's like, dude, I want to do these more often, but I got to convince my boss to do more of them, right? So I sent him a message so he could show that to his boss. So do the same thing. Let Clausematch know that you appreciate what they're doing for you as well. And my email is there. I typically don't give my email out to people publicly like this. So if any of you have follow-up questions and want to reach out to me, let me know. We can even set up a short call to kind of talk about some things that are a little bit more specific to your organization that we can't do in a group setting like this. Okay, so let me just look through here and see if there's, I know we're coming up on time, so Amanda, take back over whenever you need to.
No problem. Yeah, if anyone has any other additional questions for Jason, you can put them in the chat. And we're also going to send a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording and the slides if you want to take a look and watch it again, or of course, share it with colleagues. So with that, I'm going to thank you, Jason, again, for leading a very insightful session. And now that we're at almost at the 12:30 mark, I'm going to actually pass it on to Jessica Hunt, who is going to lead the fun aspect of this webinar, which will be our pasta making session. So Jessica, I'm going to give you co-host access now. So you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you. Can you see me?
Yep, I can.
Can hear me. Lovely. So I think hopefully everyone should be able to see and hear me. I hear you've all been working really hard, so hopefully we can make this next bit really fun and make some pasta. So yes, I'm Jess and I'll be leading you through the next hour of pasta making. So I'm not sure how many of you are going to stay with us, but feel free to unmute and chat at any time and get as much as involved as you want to. So I'm just going to go through the basic ingredients that we're going to need to start with. So you're going to need some flour, the 00 flour, which was sent to you. That might look like this, or it might look like this, or something slightly different anywhere where you are. And you're also going to need 3 large eggs. So hopefully those ingredients are close to you. If not, you can run off and get them now. You can bring your laptop into the kitchen, whatever works for you guys. I'll give you a minute to get those things. You're also going to need a fork so that we can do some whisking and a nice surface area in order to start making the pasta. I'm going to switch over camera now so that you can see the board and see my hands. I'll still be here talking you through it.
Yeah, and Jason, if you could just unshare your screen real quick, I think you have to do that to give Jessica access.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I don't see a stop share. That's why I'm like, I know I'm probably screwing something up here. I'm sorry.
No problem.
How can I? Well, here, I guess if I stop video, no, that's not going to do it.
Oh, I think
There we go. There we go. There we go. You kicked me off. Thank you.
No problem. And I will turn my video off as well to give you full view of Jessica.
No problem. Can everybody see me now? I think hopefully you can. So hopefully you've got all your ingredients. So we're going to start with 300 grams of flour. You kind of want to pour that out into a little shape. You can make it nice and tight, like a little bowl full, and then you want to either make a little well using maybe your spoon or your finger, or I've got this nice little instrument here that I'm going to use. You want to make this well nice and big so that your eggs will fit in it nicely and they won't be coming out over the side. Not to worry if you see the bottom of the chopping board or the bottom of the table, that's all right. You want to keep making sure your well is nice and big, but you also want to make sure that those edges don't have any cracks in it. So hopefully the eggs won't go all over the place. No worries if they do, you can just save that. Okay, once you've done that, it's time to start cracking your eggs. So I've just got a little bowl here. I'm going to crack them and put them into the center of our well. You want all your egg here, the yolk as well. 3 large eggs should be going in. Obviously, try and not get the shell, otherwise you might have a bit of crunchy pasta. Hopefully, we're all up to the same speed and we've got all our flour and dough together. Lovely. So once we start doing that, I've just got a little napkin. I'm just going to wipe my hands. So a top tip before we start, because you will have to be using your hands at some point, you can either wet your hands with a little bit of oil. This will help you later when we start using our hands to knead the dough. So you can use a little bit of oil, or you can use a bit of flour, whatever you have to hand. This will just help it to stop from sticking. So we now want to start kind of whisking the eggs together, just like you would if you were going to make scrambled egg. You want to try and keep it in the center of the well, making sure you're getting all the flour from the bottom. And hopefully this will now start thickening up and it will be easier to roll out when we get to the stage. So once you think that your egg is all kind of nice and scrambled in the middle, I think the best way of getting the dough into the center, you can start introducing it with a fork if you want, but I've always been taught if you kind of flick little sections in at a time, just a little bit at a time, you can start then thickening up the dough. So hopefully we're all at the same pace. I don't know if you can turn your mic on or camera, but feel free to do that if you can and chat along, or please use the chat function. I know that you guys have put questions in there for Jason, so please feel free to do that and I can keep checking that. So this might seem like it's a bit of a slow process, but it's important to go slowly just so you are mixing all of the dough together, which will help release the gluten later, but also just so we're not having any of those crazy escapee eggs running down the board. I can't see what you guys are doing, but if you do have an escapee egg, not to worry, just use your hands and they might get a little bit sticky and you can just give them a wipe in a minute. So you just want to get it all mixed in. I don't know if anybody's made pasta before, maybe they haven't made tagliatelle, so this will be exciting for you guys. I know you're also all around the world, I believe, so it will be different timing, so it might be somebody's lunch or somebody's dinner, so that will be good. So nice and easy. The reason we use 00 flour is because it's slightly thinner than the American flours which we would use to make cakes, and it's also just slightly dustier, so it's much easier for making pasta and pizza. Some are specifically just for pasta, so it's always worth checking the packaging. So hopefully you can see that it's starting to thicken up. I'm now going to shove some more flour in, get that nice and thick. Some people like to go straight in with their hands, and please feel free to do that if you enjoy doing that. So yes, today, as I said, today we'll be making tagliatelle, but there are obviously so many different types of pasta you can make. I believe there's about 350 different types of pasta which you can make, which is amazing. And tagliatelle is one of my favorites. Starting to really thicken up now, so I'm just going to be a bit quicker with moving flour in. So the general rule is it's kind of, as the Italian grandmothers would say, 1 fistful of flour for every 1 egg, and that's about 1 portion, and so we roughly say that's about 100 grams. So today we're making essentially 3 portions, but if you want to eat it yourself, there will be no judgments here. But we've got 300 grams of flour and 3 large eggs. Now it's really important to use the large eggs because that will be the same quantity of eggs as flour, so you're getting the right consistency. You don't want to be using medium eggs, as you won't get the same consistency. Right, mine is nearly thickening up now. Hope everybody is roughly at the same stage. Okay, mine has got to the point where it's hardly running at all now, so I'm actually going to get in there and go with my hands. Just get this last bit of flour in. It does make a bit of a mess, but that's part of the fun. There we are. So now we're on to the kneading stage. Hopefully you're all there, if not perhaps ahead of me. So there is no secret to kneading. You've just got to push the dough around. You've got to squeeze it. You've got to pinch it. You've got to move it between your hands. You don't want to kind of crumble it. That's when you kind of are making cookies and breadcrumbs and such. You want to make sure you're moving it around in the palm of your hands. And as your palm gets warmer, it'll be easier to knead as well. So as you can see, it's really coming together now nicely. And the oil has helped, because even though they're a little bit dusty, I haven't got loads of eggs stuck to my hands, so that will be easier later. So just keep kneading. This is the toughest part, and this is why, again, perhaps Italian grandmothers have such great arm strength, is because they're constantly kneading. Now you can use a machine for this, but it is better to use your hands, because then you can constantly feel what the dough might need. So it might need a little bit more water, it might need a little bit more dough, depending on your consistency. So it's better to use your hands, even if you do have a machine. But if you wanted to make it quickly, or if you wanted to just make it in the machine, you can do that too. So we're just pushing it around, we're making sure we're getting all those creases and cracks, and it will start to be a little bit crumbly on the board. Now, it's important to make sure you are picking up most of the crumbs, because obviously we've made the right quantity of flour versus the eggs, but also you don't need all these little bits on the board. So at this stage, I tend to, if you're doing it on a board, I tend to actually turn over my board so it's nice and clean and fresh for rolling out, or you can quickly wipe down the surface perhaps. If not, just keep going on the board. I can already feel my muscles starting to work. Now you can do this for as long as you think that the dough needs, but definitely it's at least 5 minutes of kneading. This is to make sure the gluten starts to rise, which will also rise when we put it in the fridge later. At this point, I should say, if anybody has any cling film, we're going to need that. And we're also going to need, well, if you don't have cling film, you can use a damp cloth and leave it on the side. And hopefully you're all near a fridge and you can go and pop it in the fridge. But we'll keep kneading. So as you can see, it's coming together really nicely. You don't want it too sticky that it's all sticking to your hands. I've still got a little bit left over from earlier, but not coming off the dough, which is good. But you also don't want it too dry that it cracks. So this is actually the perfect consistency at the moment. I'm sure all of yours are as well. And you're just going to keep kneading until it's silky smooth, and I'll show you the trick later when we get in to know when it's ready, but keep kneading. So obviously this is not gluten-free or not vegan, but you can make gluten-free and vegan pasta. I don't know if anybody has made it before. Feel free to pop in the chat if you've tried anything like that, or perhaps wholemeal pasta. But my mum's vegan, so I actually grew up making vegan pasta. Well, she can't have dairy, so we grew up not using the eggs, and just all you need to replace that with is some water, and that will do the same trick, and perhaps a little bit of oil just to make sure it's all sticking together. Likewise with gluten, you would want to get the gluten-free flour, which they do in most shops, certainly where I live. And then you would just want to get some xanthan gum, which basically replaces the gluten aspect of the dough and will help when we roll it out later and put it in the fridge. Lovely. So we've been kneading for about 8 minutes now. So we'll just do a few more to make sure it's nice and smooth. I'm just going to get this bit of flour up there. There we go. I wish I could see what all of yours looks like, but I don't think I'm able to. But please feel free to, even if you've got sticky hands, maybe write something in the chat or unmute yourself, perhaps. Let me know how it's going on your end. Hopefully you can start to see mine now, really making a shape. It's not cracking, which is brilliant. The reason it's also good to do it by your hands and not by machine is because different climates, the dough will be different. So if you're in a drier, hotter climate, you are going to need to add more water. So it's best to do it by hand because you can check that your dough is doing what you want to do in your climate. So it's been very hot and muggy here, so I'm very happy that it hasn't been cracking. Pushing it together for a few more minutes. Okay, I think I'm just about ready. I hope that maybe some of you are, but not to worry if you're not. The most important thing is actually getting it into the fridge and letting it set for 30 minutes. So wherever you're at, I suggest we all do that together. The trick to know that it is done is if you press it, it should start to slowly rise back up, just as mine has done. I'm not sure if that's coming through on the camera. You'll press it and it will start to rise, and that is how you know that it is ready. So nice little ball. No worries if there's kind of some crevices here, that will all get rolled out later. I'm going to take my cling film now, and you've got to make sure that you cover your entire dough, because if you leave any bits out, those bits will go dry and they won't be that nice later when it comes to rolling. So you just want to make sure that it's covered. Equally, if you don't have cling film in the house, that's totally fine. Maybe if you just make the cloth, the tea towel a little bit damp, then you can put that over it. So hopefully everyone's got their dough and it's all wrapped up. I'm going to go and put mine in the fridge, and I'll be with you in 2 minutes. Brilliant. So hopefully you've all put yours in the fridge. I'm just going to give my hands a quick wipe, ready to make the sauce. So that's going to set for about 30 minutes. Now you can set it for longer if you wanted to make it overnight. If you wanted to even freeze it, you can do that. But for the purpose of today, we're going to have 30 minutes. So now we're going to start on the sauce. We're just going to make a lovely basic tomato sauce. So if anybody doesn't like tomato sauce, then please feel free to add whatever you like. It's just to complement the pasta, really, because today is about the pasta. So hopefully we should all have some ingredients for the pasta sauce. I've got a large onion, I've got some tomatoes, I've got some garlic, and I've got some basil. So they're going to be our main ingredients. So we're going to start by chopping the onion. I've already pre-chopped some of mine, but I'm going to chop some with you. I thought I might cry a little bit with all the chopping of onions, so I thought it was best to do a little bit beforehand. There's no secret to this, just roughly chop it. If you like large bits of onion, you can chop large bits of onion. If you like small bits, you can do that, but I quite like getting diced. Now, in all my years of cooking, I haven't really learned a secret that stops me from crying when I use the onions. Somebody said stuck on a teaspoon, or somebody said wear goggles, but I haven't learned anything. So if anybody does have any tips, please pop them in the chat, because I'm forever crying. Equally, if you don't like onion, you can use a leek or some shallots. Whatever you have in the fridge, really. The good thing about pasta is there's so many different sauces that you can just make whatever you fancy. So either you're in your kitchen doing this, or you might need to head over to the kitchen for this point, because we will be using a hob. Lovely. There's my onion all chopped. I'm happy with that. I'm going to put mine in the bowl. Lovely. Okay, so that's ready to go any minute. I'm going to whack that in the pan. And you can start cooking that. So I'm just going to move my camera ever so slightly so that you can see my pan. Hopefully you can see that now. Brilliant. So I've got my little pan. I'm just going to put it on a medium heat. So everyone's medium heat will be slightly different. I'm going to put mine on a number 4 roughly. And I'm just going to add a little bit of oil. There we are. You just want to get that simmering. Don't want it high, you don't want to burn it, but you just want to keep cooking the onion until it kind of goes nice golden brown and soft. Start with the onion. Then I'm going to move on to my basil. This is my basil here. Again, you just want to roughly chop that, stalks and all, so that you get the nice flavour. You might want to keep some so you can have a nice pretty garnish on top if that's what you're into. Or you can chuck it all in the pan if you like. We are going to leave the basil till last because we want the basil not to wilt and we want all that flavour to come out. So interestingly, different shaped pastas are good at absorbing different sauces. So shorter pastas such as kind of penne and things, that grabs onto the sauce better than kind of the long thin pastas. Also pastas with ridge in it, like rigatoni, they also grab into the sauce better. So interestingly, different sauces suit different pastas. Right, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that'll be nice. I'm just going to scoot that to the side for now. I have the smell of that. So that's all ready for when I need it. So now we're going to get our tomatoes. So you wanted 500 grams of tomatoes. I've got nice big juicy tomatoes, but again, if you have cherry tomatoes or you have plum tomatoes, whatever you want, you can sling them in. I'm just going to have a little stir of my onions, make sure they're not burning. Turn mine up slightly. It should be just simmering away. Lovely. So you want to just start again, roughly chopping the tomatoes. It's all nice and easy. There's no strict rule to follow when making the sauce. Again, if you want to use tin tomatoes in a can, feel free to do that, whack that in. It's a nice quick meal, this one. You can make it after work today. Some of you are in the middle of the day, some of you are finished. It's perfect for lunch. You can also add whatever veg you've got lying in the fridge. I always seem to have some courgettes in the fridge, so I usually chuck those in. Oh, I can hear my onions starting to cook now. Just check the chat that nobody's messaged me any tips about onions. I really do need those tips. So I wonder if any of you have made pasta before, if it's something you've done with your family, but hopefully after this you'll be making pasta a lot. My friends are always quite surprised at how easy it is. I've been making it for a long time, but you know, pasta is so cheap and easily accessible. You can just pick it up off the shelf. But I always think it's really fun to make it yourself, and fresh pasta is lovely. Sure you can see what I'm doing. So our dough's sat in the fridge. The gluten's starting to work. It's going to be easy to roll out. I have to say, you can make a big batch of this and freeze it and then just leave it to defrost overnight. You can make it the day before if you need to. And it should last a few days in the fridge as well. Lots of recipes online about how to make pasta, and I also think there's lots of TikToks now. I don't know if people are into that, but TikTok, there's lots of cool tricks and tips on there, so you can always check that out if you are interested about making different types of pasta. Lovely. So I'm happy with my tomatoes now, just roughly chopped. Just going to give my onion a little bit of a stir. That's starting to nicely turn golden. Add a tiny bit more oil to mine. And in with the tomatoes. Try and get all that juice in. Oh, it's starting to smell lovely. Right, I think that's as much juice as I'm going to be able to get at. There we are. Want to give that a good stir. That's going to be lovely. So if you're someone who doesn't like big tomatoes, or you want everything finely chopped, you might be still chopping, and that's fine. You can all still see my screen. It's quite funny not being able to see you all. I can't see your lovely dishes and all your lovely kitchens. There we are, that's all mixing together. Now I'm going to get the garlic. So you can get 2 cloves of garlic. I seem to have very huge cloves of garlic. So I'm going to be doing 1 clove and a tiny little clove here, because that's about 2 cloves of garlic. Now you can either cut that small, chop it up small, or you can perhaps cheat and use a garlic crusher. I always use a garlic crusher because it's easier and it's quicker, and I like it. So I'm gonna have to cut that one in half, it's so big. And then I'm just going to put that directly into the pot. My partner insists on chopping it rather than using a crusher, but I definitely prefer crushing it. Obviously, if you don't like garlic, please feel free not to add garlic, or add more if you absolutely love garlic. You can also use garlic granules. I know some people use those instead of fresh garlic, or I think you can get a thing called lazy garlic, where it's in a pot and it smells delicious, and you can just have that in your fridge and add a spoonful of that every time you need it. How are we doing for time? Brilliant. So a few more ingredients and then we will go and check on our lovely risen dough. Just make sure I'm getting all that in. That's a slightly funny angle here. Smelling gorgeous. So yeah, you just want to keep that on a medium to low heat. You just want that simmering away. Again, if you've got to come in from work and you've got a busy day, you can just put the ingredients all in, leave that simmering away, and that won't be burning. That will be lovely. Brilliant. I'm now going to add that you can salt and pepper to taste. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I think we've got 5 more minutes before we want to go and get our dough out the fridge. So for the next step, you are going to need a board again, or you can do it on a flat surface. And you're also going to need either a rolling pin or a bottle of wine, which is lovely because then you can drink the bottle of wine afterwards. But lots of people might not have a rolling pin, so that works just as good to roll out. Maybe a bottle of red wine will go nicely with it. So when we get the dough out, you'll know it's kind of done because it will look almost a little bit dimpled and almost a little bit like cellulite. That's what people say, and that's what I've noticed. That's how you kind of know when it's done. So if you do happen to be making pasta in different areas, different climates, then you can always keep a spritz bottle handy. You can spritz your hands, spritz the dough, and that will just keep it nice and wet and easy for you to mold. And also you can obviously add some flour if it's too sticky. Hopefully nobody's spilled all over the edge and it's all on the floor. Hopefully you're all pros. I think the key with that is just making sure it is big enough to have all your eggs. Obviously, if you're only having 1 egg and 100 grams of flour, it'll be slightly easier. Okay, mine is looking delicious. I hope all yours is too. I'm now going to add my basil. And I'm going to keep a little bit to sprinkle on top, so I feel like an absolute pro. Again, you can use any garnish you want here. I'm just going to turn that down to make sure that is simmering away nicely. Okay, so let's just stop and reassess and make sure we're all together. So at this stage, you're going to need a nice clean surface to be rolling out your dough. I'm going to move my chopping board here. Maybe give it a little wipe down. Making sure when we get the dough out, we don't have any residue left over. You're all probably cleaner chefs than I am. I'm definitely one of those chefs that gets everything out at once and then has a massive cleaning chore to do at the end, but that's all part of the fun. Lovely. So you're going to need your rolling pin or your wine bottle, a little bit of the flour from earlier just to dust the table with and dust some of the layers with. Hopefully it's all coming together nicely. And you also perhaps want to start boiling the kettle at this point, or boiling some water for your pasta, which we're going to be cutting up in a minute. Lovely. If everybody wants to go and get their dough from the fridge, that shall have set for the time being, and we can start rolling it out. There we are. Just check on my sauce. Now, it wasn't quite 30 minutes, but I am aware of time and I want to show you the next stage. So feel free to leave yours in there a little bit longer if you want to, just to make sure the gluten has completely come out and that your dough is ready. That sauce is looking lovely. Smells lovely. Right, so it should have turned. Oh, we need to put that in front of the camera. There we go. You can see it's really smooth. It's this really nice kind of golden doughy, and still when I'm pressing it, it's making nice little indents in the dough. So if yours is under the tea towel, then hopefully it will have done the same thing. I have used the tea towel sometimes when I haven't had cling film, and it has done the same thing. So you should all be fine. I'm going to get a little bit of my flour and just sprinkle it on the table. This is just to stop it sticking and to make sure it's rolling out nicely. At this point, you can also put a little bit of dough, a little bit of flour on your hands, just to make sure it's not sticking, and also just to feel like a real professional. I'm going to move my camera across slightly again, just so you can see. There we go. Still on the pasta. Perfect. Okay, so now it's quite a large piece of dough to roll out. So I suggest cutting it into quarters or halves or whatever you feel comfortable rolling out. Obviously, you can do it all in one go, but you are trying to get the dough quite thin, almost kind of between a playing card and a beer mat. You're really talking quite thin there. So I find it's easier to cut it into quarters. So that's what I'm going to do. Got a fresh knife, so it's not on my ingredients. Go and take a quarter. Now it's really important to make sure you wrap your excess dough up, just because you don't want it drying out. So either put it back in the cling film or put it back in under the tea towel. Lovely. Now you want to make sure you've got lots of space because this is the fun part. Use my tongs for later. Amazing. So you want to start rolling. Again, with your rolling pin, you can also dust that with a little bit of flour. That's going to help it stop sticking. Basically, you just don't want it to stick at all. So you want to make sure everything is covered. And you want to start rolling. Again, there's not really a secret to rolling. It's just fun. You just keep pressing it out, moving it up, picking it up, making sure it doesn't stick to the table, using more flour if you need to. Don't worry about using more flour. That will come off when we boil it. Just going to keep checking on my pasta, my pasta sauce. You want to keep stirring. Oh, that really is smelling lovely. I'm just checking that none of you have put any comments in the chat box. Oh, Veronica, you feel my pain. I haven't yet found a cure for onion-induced weeping. Oh, I was really hoping you might have found one, Veronica. There's so many old wives' tales, but nothing seems to work. In fact, sometimes if I can't be dealing with the crying, I use a leek instead. If I've, got mascara on, or I just don't feel like crying. I'm just checking nobody else has commented. If anybody does have any tips for me and Veronica on how we can make sure we don't cry when cooking onions, and please feel free. I don't know how people make onion soup with all that onions. Mine's getting a little bit stuck to the table. There we go. So you just want to be rolling it out nice and thin. I'm going to put a little bit more flour on my rolling pin. There we go. So if yours is still in the fridge because you wanted to let it rise a bit more, that's totally fine. You can just be watching or stirring your sauce or watching TV, whatever you fancy. But hopefully I can give you some tips and show you how to do it, and you can make it later if you fancy. Or perhaps you just want to make it later because you want to have your dinner later instead. Okay, so a good way to know whether it is rolled out enough is, I don't know if you can see, you want to be able to see if your hand's behind it. So at the moment, I think I've still got a little bit more rolling to do because you can't really see my hand behind that at the moment. So I'm going to roll out a bit more. The thinner you get it, the better it will taste for this pasta. And just keep on rolling. So the next bit we do is obviously going to be the cutting. Now, obviously, some people do have pasta machines that do it for them, and that is brilliant. And hopefully one day I do have that, but I do actually prefer to roll it out myself and to cut it myself. I think it's nicer. You get more of a sense of accomplishment having done it. And I just think it's fun. And it helps if you're ever stuck and you don't have a machine. So it's always good to learn how to do it without a machine. Just check on my sauce again. Nice simple sauce to complement the pasta. Okay, I think I might be closer to being done. So I'm just going to hold that up so that you can see kind of how thin it is. It does almost look the width of a playing card. So I think that is just about done. Hopefully or roughly at the same stage as me, but not to worry if you're not. So the next bit, you want to make sure that your dough has got a bit of flour on because we don't want it to stick when we start cutting it. So I'm just going to use a bit of flour on both sides. Now, there's lots of ways you can cut this into tagliatelle. You can either use a pizza cutter and cut really thin slices yourself. You can, again, use a machine, like I said earlier. But I'm going to show you one way I've been doing it all my life. This is how I've done it. So you want to almost concertina the pasta in from each side Don't worry about what shape it is. It doesn't matter if it's circular or square, whatever you've got out and rolled out will be perfect. Because also it will be your own and unique and nobody can make that like you. Hopefully you can still all see this. And then the last one you just want to make sure is tucked in. So that's how it should roughly look. Hopefully everybody's looks like that. Don't forget, this is only a quarter of our pasta, of our dough, so we will have more to add. Hopefully your water should be boiling on the hob for your pasta, because we're nearly at that stage. So again, we're going to take our knife. Now, if you were in a fancy restaurant, you might want to just trim the edges off so it's quite all uniform. But again, if you want to waste, not want that, you can use that pasta. So then we're just going to start cutting into the pasta. Now, you don't want to make too thick slices. Obviously, you're more than welcome to if you would like. I roughly go for this size. They kind of look like little Swiss rolls at this stage. Now, if you're completely panicking and you've got this far and you're thinking, I can't do that, or mine's all stuck together, don't worry, roll it back out and start again. It will start to dry, so you will have to be careful, but you will have some leeway, some time to play with. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. And then hopefully, if we've done the trick, it should just roll out into tagliatelle slices. Be careful when you're rolling them out, you don't want them to start breaking. I'm happy with the thickness of mine. Hopefully you are all happy too. This is the bit that might take a little bit of time. So I'm just checking the chat. Veronica, Jess, would you say a quarter of the dough as you cut it would make one portion once cooked? Yeah, I would say so. So 300 grams is technically three portions. So maybe just slightly under a portion, Veronica. But once you cook it, it might be easier to tell portion wise. But yeah, I would say a quarter of the dough, maybe just slightly more. It might make a smaller portion, but yeah, that's a good way of doing it as well, rather than making individual 100-gram flours. Hopefully everyone's is starting to look like that. Just seeing what. Oh, okay, some more comments. Calissa, I hope I've said that correctly. Calissa said, not a tip, but fun fact, I never cry with onions when wearing contact lenses. Don't know the science behind it, but it works. Well, there we go. Maybe you have found the science behind it. Maybe it's something to do with the solution or the layer over your eyes. So maybe that's what I need to do, invest in some contact lenses, and hopefully I won't be crying. Thank you for that top tip. Just check the chat. That is true, Veronica. Now we have an excuse to change the colour of our eyes or do something funky with them, like put cat eyes in. I see people do that sometimes. Just check the messages. Lovely. Thank you for that help. So hopefully you're still all rolling out. Maybe you're quicker than me. I'm being a little bit slow reading the messages, but very helpful. Thank you for that. And it started lovely. And then you can, I don't know, if you want to look like a true professional, you hang it in your kitchen and you'll look like a proper Italian restaurant. Now, I think it is best to cook this straight away. But again, if you did want to keep it in your fridge, maybe until dinner time, that's totally fine. Lovely. And there we have some nice Italian pasta. Mine's got quite a lot of flour around it, surrounding it already. But if you did want to just kind of top it off with a bit of flour from the packet. Brilliant. Now I'm just going to get my boiling water and we're going to start cooking it. There we are. I have got my boiling water. I'm going to change my pan over. Perhaps some of you just have been boiling it on the hot. That's fine too. Again, anything to make things a little bit easier. And boil the water. Lovely. Perfect. So that's on. That's going to be starting. So you want to add a little bit of salt to the pasta water. This is going to make sure that the surface is tough and not slimy. So the salt actually does stick to the pasta and it will make it nice and firm and not too slimy. Now, the myth with, well, what people think with pasta is that you have to cook it for a long time. That might be true of packet pasta, although with fresh pasta, it honestly is about 1 to 2 minutes. I might turn on to myself just for a moment. Or I'll just turn on to the boiling water because then you'll be able to see it. And there we go. So you only want to cook it for about 1 to 2 minutes. It's really not very long at all. I might start rolling a little bit more of mine out just while we wait for the water to boil. Some people think that it's best to add a little bit of oil to the water to stop the spaghetti from sticking together, but that's actually, well, I've found that's actually a bit of a myth, and it actually makes the sauce then not stick to the pasta. So avoid doing that unless it's something that you've always done and you do want to do. Please feel free to do that. And when we do put the pasta in the water, we do want to keep stirring that continuously. We're all a culprit of it sometimes, but we put our pasta on and we go and we get unchanged or we have a shower, but actually you kind of want to stir it continuously so that the pasta cooks all at the same time and it's consistent. So you only need to cook it for about 1 to 2 minutes until it loses that kind of raw flour taste. You can keep testing it while you cook it. That's always the fun part. And that goes with the phrase al dente, which actually means to the tooth. So you want to keep trying it whilst you cook it, and then you'll know it's ready. It should be firm and offering some resistance, but also tender. So I think we have, or I certainly have a habit to perhaps sometimes overcook the pasta. So it's a little bit slimy, maybe sticks together. But actually that is a little bit too overdone, unless that's how you like your pasta, of course. So hopefully your sauce will still be simmering away just on a low heat. We've made pretty good timing, so if anybody does have any questions or want to show us their pasta, then please feel free. Equally, if you wanted to let yours sit in the fridge for a while and you're only just rolling out, no problem. I'm happy to repeat any step of the process. So again, we just want to be rolling this out to the size of a playing card and a beer mat, between a playing card and a beer mat, or that you can see your hand through it. See, this is already starting to take a different shape than the last one. Oh, starting to fold in. There we go. If any of you are rolling the wine bottle, you might be already opening the wine bottle to have with the dinner, and I wouldn't blame you. So we're nearly at the final stage. So if you've got a bowl handy, we will be plating up in a minute. Equally, if you've got something that you want to put on top, I've got a little bit of Parmesan cheese, which I'll be adding. Perhaps some vegan cheese, although we have been using eggs, but perhaps if you have made vegan pasta, then you can put some vegan cheese on top. And I've also got my basil, which I'll be adding as a little garnish on top. Obviously, feel free to salt and pepper afterwards if you want, but it is better to add it to the ingredients as you go, especially salt. Okay, my water is starting to bubble, so it's boiling. So I'm going to be putting my pasta in now. Obviously, this is just the one portion I'm doing at the moment, but if anybody wants to do all their portion, please go for it. Just going to check the chat. I can see some people. It helps for me to wash knife and an onion in a very cold water before cutting and then cut quickly. Brilliant. I've never tried that one. Thank you so much for that. Definitely going to try that. I'm going to put this to the side and start stirring my tagliatelle whilst I also read more of the chat. Actually, cold looks like helping a lot, as it's not that of a problem while it's cold. Oh, I see, the knife. Brilliant. So quickly cutting. I think that is probably the most helpful tip, really, just to get through it quickly, minding your fingers as you go. So I'm just doing that tip that I said to you earlier about continuously stirring the pasta, just so it's cooking all at the same time. You really only want to do a couple of minutes. Might even taste a piece already. I can get a piece out. Don't know about you, but there's such a sense of accomplishment when you've made it yourself. Just going to check the chat. Veronica's put a little bottle of wine emoji in. I'm loving that. I hope you're having a glass. Definitely getting there. I'd say one more minute. Literally a few minutes you want to do this for. So you might be thinking, oh, I better go and get a colander or a sieve and drain the pasta, but you actually want to use tongs if you do have them, just to take the pasta out. This is just so it doesn't all stick together in a clump. And you can also use a little bit of the pasta water, should you wish, to add to your sauce if you want to make it a bit thicker or runnier, smoother. I'm sure you all know about keeping a little bit of pasta water. Brilliant. I'm happy with mine. Hopefully you all are too. Hopefully you're at roughly the same stage. I'm going to get my pasta bowl. Oh, that looks lovely. The only thing with tongs is it does take a little bit longer. So with a sieve as well, if you do, and when you do use a sieve, is you actually want to slightly turn off the boiling water a few minutes, a few kind of seconds before you think it's done, because when you are using a colander to drain your pasta, it will keep cooking while it's in the colander. So if you think it's done and it's al dente, that's when you definitely want to stop. There we are. I'm happy with that. Brilliant. So hopefully you've all got your pasta sauce to hand. So I've made one portion of pasta here, so I'm going to use a little bit of my pasta sauce, but if you've used all of your pasta, then please feel free to put all of your sauce on. It's really come together really nicely. It's all simmered down. I quite like my pasta sauce quite thick and not that runny. Obviously, if you're making perhaps a bolognese or a chili or something like that, then it would be slightly different. But I prefer this. So cook it to how much you like, and add that pasta water if you do need to add the pasta water. I think I'm just about done. I'm going to get my Parmesan. If you are and you don't have Parmesan, you can actually use I'm just going to pop that down there. You can use yeast in cooking. Sometimes I've used yeast. I need to double check. I believe yeast is vegan, but it might be worth a double check. But that gives the same kind of cheesy, nutty flavour. I quite like a bit of Parmesan, so I put a lot on, as you can see. And now I'm just going to top it off with some fresh basil. Now, I don't know about you, but that looks like lovely pasta, fresh, vibrant colours. Now you can add some pine nuts if you fancy some of those, or you could add anything you like, but that to me is a perfect dinner and I shall be enjoying that tonight. Where are we all at? If anybody can maybe perhaps turn their mic on, let me know how it's gone for you. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody want me to go over any of the, I'm just going to switch so you can see my face. There we go. Hello. Haven't seen you face to face for a long time, so love it. Great facilitation, thank you so much. No problem, Mary, thank you so much for joining in. I hope that your pasta is delicious and that you enjoy it. Feel free to raise your hand. Yes, please, Amanda, if anybody would like to speak or ask anything, I can definitely. How long can the pasta be kept in the fridge if we have any leftovers? So do you mean cooked or the kind of the raw dough? Cooked, I would say I would eat, you can definitely eat it tomorrow. Both, please. Okay, so the dough can definitely be kept for a couple of days, but also you can freeze it, which I would recommend freezing it just so it's more fresh. I would take it out the freezer perhaps the day off that you want to cook it in the morning, and you can cook it in the evening. But cooked, I would say tomorrow, just because it is fresh pasta, it's not the same as packet pasta. You probably do want to eat that tomorrow. You can keep it separate from the sauce, and perhaps you can make a different sauce if you fancy. The problem is with fresh pasta is when you do heat it up, it will go slightly rubbery. So either eat it cold or do heat it up, but again, you won't need to heat it up too much, otherwise you overcook it. Does anybody else have any other questions? That was a great question, thank you. Oh, I'm so glad that you've all enjoyed it and it's been a fun class. I've had so much fun talking you through it. I kind of do this all the time. It's been nice to actually sit down and think about each step at a time, really. So it's been really fun. I'm so glad you enjoyed it, and you've all worked so super hard today that I think you deserved to have something fun. And now your dinner's literally ready. You could go and sit and eat that with a glass of wine if you wanted.
Thanks. I have one last question for you. Do you run any of these other sessions outside of pasta making for anyone who's interested?
I can definitely speak to Lucy about that. I'm sure there are so many other pasta classes that are run. So yeah, I'm sure I can speak to Lucy about that and see what sort of pasta classes there are. Tagliatelle is my specialty. That's what I like doing. And I find that really fun. But yeah, I'm sure there are definitely other pasta classes. Certainly around London. I was even speaking to my friends today and they've been to different cookery classes around London. So there are some things in London if anybody wants to pop by.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Jessica. This was really great. I know a lot of times we really just, do webinar and kind of end it. So it was nice to end this on a fun note, something that's engaging and, people can eat after this, perfect timing, whether it's for lunch or dinner. So thank you again for leading this. And thanks everyone for sticking around. We're going to send the recording to the webinar tomorrow. So look out for that in your inbox.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to eat this, and I hope that you all enjoy yours too. It's just calling out to me. So I hope you all have a lovely lunch or dinner, and thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, if you do have any last questions, and feel free to send them over, but I think I've talked you through every step, and hopefully it should be nice and simple to follow. So hopefully you've all enjoyed it.
Perfect. All right. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.